2010 was an interesting year for both the local and international property markets. Some showed positive signs of recovery, while others stagnated or even regressed. We've heard from the economists. Now joining me in studio to give us some insight into what the stars predict for the property market in 2011 is Jacqueline Brook, astrologer and tutor of the tradition. Jacqueline, thank you so much for joining me today. All right, 2010 was an interesting year. We saw shots in the arms, basically, and that's what we call quantitative easing 2, quantitative easing 1 out of the US. We've seen the resource market recover quite extensively. Property not doing that badly in some parts of the world, others still lagging behind. What was your sense of the year that was?
Well, the sense of the year that was pretty much paves the way forward for the year that now is. From an astrological perspective, the planetary configurations, and I've never liked to get too technical astrologically when I talk to the layperson, but the heavens last year were literally in a mess. And I think that because astrology is a symbolic language and it reflects pretty much what is going on down here on our terrain, I think not only on a global perspective to do with the economy and property markets, etc., but just in everybody's mundane lives, there you could see the reflection of how bad things were. The actual trigger didn't occur last year in 2010. That actually occurred previously. It was the aftermath that we experienced last year, specifically here in South Africa, because it did take a little bit longer for us to feel the ripple effect. Now, I think that looking at the heavens for this year, we have an echo of what we experienced last year. Yes, we do have an inkling that things might possibly improve. Even if we do look at the local property market, I was speaking to some estate agents and did some research. Sales are definitely slightly improved. There is a shift towards movement in that sector, but it's not going to be at an excessive rate. And you know, when we look at 2011, I think we're pretty much in for more of the same, albeit slightly more rosy, but the flavor is definitely similar.
Jackie, it's quite interesting that you say that the heavens were a mess last year. When you look at the equity markets, though, JSE All Share is again very close to its all-time high of above 33,000 points. When you look at the property market on the stock exchange, also performed relatively well. Why is there such a big dichotomy from what we see in the real economy to the equity markets? Because we keep saying, you know, the equity markets price in the future, so the future should look rosy.
Okay, look, from an astrological perspective, all of the planets move at different speeds along the ecliptic. So one planet can be in a mess, so to speak, but another can be doing quite nicely, thank you very much. And that planet could rule something, for example, like copper, which you know, had a great run. So it's not to say that everything is going to be doom and gloom, but in mundane astrology, which is the astrology pertaining to individual countries and the world at large, you know, we can't delineate a chart for the world because there is no birth chart for the world. But we would have to delineate each country individually, and no astrologer really has the time to do that. So, you know, we sort of tend to pay attention to the main countries, or definitely the one in which we reside. But what we can do is we can gauge a general flavor of the overall tone based on the general movement in the heavens with the celestial bodies, specifically with two planets, Jupiter and Saturn. Those are the two slowest moving planets. They're known as the keepers of time, or the great chronocrators, and they pretty much determine the flavor. But that doesn't mean that absolutely everything is going to be miserable. Obviously, there will still be pluses as well.
And from what you alluded to earlier, we were chatting offline, you were saying Saturn and Jupiter, they're going to be in the same position that they were during the big crash a few years ago in March this year.
Absolutely. They're going to be in opposition. Now, just to demystify this whole thing, the planets travel around the ecliptic, which is 360 degrees, and what happens is when the planets are in opposition, they're 180 degrees apart, and that opposition perfects on the 28th of March this year. and it's an echo of what we had a couple of years ago. Now, they are the great chronocrators. They do indicate the flavor of the times. And even though certain markets were performing well, etc., last year, and even property didn't do that badly, the overall flavor compared to a couple of years previously is still on the back foot. So, you know, if we look at what Jupiter and Saturn are doing, they're going to perfect that opposition at the end of March. And
how often do they get in opposition? Does this happen often?
No, it doesn't happen often, because Jupiter will take 12 years to circumvent the ecliptic, and Saturn takes 29 years. So that is why we can look at them in mundane astrology, because they move so slowly.
So we can comfortably say that something big will happen by the end of March. Is that what you're alluding to?
Eleni, it's not that on that day something big is going to happen. You know, the effects sort of build up, and then you have the exact planetary configuration, and then you still have effects afterwards. So it's more about a cycle as opposed to on that specific day, boom, something terrible is going to happen. But I definitely think we need to watch out for March and April. In my opinion, astrologically, are extremely interesting. And it is an echo of what we had a couple of years ago. There is definitely the same flavor. And my advice to people is do not become bullish. Really, heed the lessons from last year.
Do not become bullish. The bull market has been around on the equity front again for almost 2 years. Now, the property market hasn't been performing as well. And again, I allude to the big dichotomy that is happening. Looking at the property market, we are expecting a little bit of an uptick. Some say that it could perhaps flatline. Are you expecting perhaps a drop-off in property markets in South Africa going forward, or do you think it could perhaps catch up to what the equity market is telling us?
I don't think there's going to be that much movement in the first half of this year. Based on the charts that I delineated, the property market in South Africa should pick up slightly in the second half of this year, and 2012 bodes a lot better for the property market to actually start catching up.
Looking at the European Union, I mean, we've got Portugal, Spain and Italy under significant pressure. Greece was forced to take a bailout because of rising bond yields. Looking at the Eurozone as a whole, yes, Portugal and Greece's debt, very sustainable, very manageable, but as soon as it becomes a Spain problem or an Italy problem, then perhaps that's when the Eurozone is going to be under pressure. What do you forecast for that region in particular in the property market?
Okay, in particular in the property market, it doesn't bode that well. But and I'm really sticking my neck out, but I have actually alluded to this before. It doesn't bode that well all round for the EU. Just based on charts that I've looked at, and I've actually been doing quite a lot of research with economists, etc., and there are a couple of big names out there internationally that are pretty much citing the same thing, that in their opinion,
the full collapse of the Eurozone
within the next, I really estimate something is going to give there within the next 3 to 5 years.
And the euro will not exist. Is that what you're alluding to?
Well, I mean, if that dissolves, their common currency has to dissolve.
Very scary scenario that you're painting, because on the desk, when we talk to economists and analysts, we say there's this tug of war between the likes of the dollar and the European Union, and of course the euro, and it's a race to the bottom because one is printing money, the other is also printing money to bail out countries. So between the US and the Eurozone, which do you think is in a worse position?
I'd say the worst position is probably the EU. Yeah, and if I can just add something there, which is very, very interesting, which maybe would be of interest to the public from an astrological perspective. One of the things that we assess in traditional astrology is what we call the cross of matter. And that cross, obviously it has 4 points. At each one of those four points, we have what we call a fixed star. Now, that fixed star is a planet. It's just that it is millions of light years away from Earth. So in relation to Earth, the speed is very, very slow. They move about 1 degree every 72 years. Now, the last fixed star let's put it this way, all 4 of them don't change fixed stars at the same time because everything moves at a different speed. But the last 4th point of that cross of matter towards the end of this year is going to move from a fixed sign into a mutable sign. Now, what that means is that all 4 corners of that cross of matter have lost their fixity. And the reflection of that, if we go back in history, and here we're talking huge cycles of time, 200 years, centuries, that sort of thing. The minute everything moves out of the fixity, life as we know it changes. And that is what we've been building up to in the past couple of well, really, I would say about 200 years, and the last one is about to give. So stability as we know it, and a lot of things that we accept to be the norm, are going to shift.
So from what I'm sensing and just surmising from some of the comments that you made, do not buy property in the Eurozone, stick to South Africa, it seems. So just give us where you would be buying, if you would be buying, if you would be selling. What is the next step forward? Because I hear a lot of turmoil, not only from a market's perspective, but also from a personal perspective. So a lot of things that people will have to deal with in 2011.
Yes, I still think that based on the charts that I've assessed, Africa still is, for me, is standing out as one of the stars in this whole comic tragedy that we've had and we've watched unfold. Certain countries, for example, even Botswana, certain countries are showing tremendous promise in the property market, and I think that in the years to come, I mean, this is not going to happen overnight. It's very, very possible that we see a stronger African stance in the property market as opposed to the US or the EU.
China property bubble, perhaps down the line. We keep looking at China as a saving grace to the world. And then only a few days ago, we heard that another property tax is going to be placed on second properties that people own. So a lot of worries about bubbles coming to the fore. If China does collapse or hits a wall, then perhaps that also spells a lot of doom and gloom for the rest of the world economy.
Absolutely. I mean, it definitely would. And that's why, again, I see Africa, if Africa can really, on some level, retain its integrity and not get sucked into the whole China scenario, if we can maintain to some level a certain amount of independence in everything that we do, I really see Africa as a continent moving forward in the years to come as more of a stable force in the property market.
And Jackie, just to end off, I mean, give us your sense. I mean, the biggest challenge that we're going to face in 2011, from whichever perspective you seem fit, just tell us about what you think is going to happen this year, what we should be looking out for.
Okay, I think from a personal perspective, if you battle with flexibility, you're going to suffer. Things are going to change, things are going to move at quite a rapid rate in all sectors and all facets of life. So the people that can really think on their feet and adapt to change are going to be the most successful. If you're still trying to hang on to something that worked for you 20 years ago, and this applies to corporates, it applies to us on all levels. If you're still trying to hang on to something that worked 20 years ago but is now outdated, you need to lose it and you need to move on. So flexibility is a key word in the next couple of years, specifically this year. And also being careful not to throw out traditional values and traditional rules and regulations that do work in favor of new. So it's very much a weighing up process in 2011.
Jackie, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining me today.